Hey, this is Big Guy DIY Robert. Today I'm going to show you how to remove your rear rotors. But I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to show you something with the rotor. I'm going to show you the rear rotor with the rotor off. Say that 3 times fast. So my truck right now, let me show you the state of it. It's sitting like this, and it's going to be sitting like this for a week because the rotors for here are available, but they're available only out in Washington. So they are being shipped as we currently speak, FedEx ground. But so what I want to do is kind of show you the reverse here of what you see when you pull the rear rotor off a F150. The removal of it is the exact same thing as my other video about removing the front rotors. There are only 4 bolts you have to take off. You have the 2 bolts here for the housing. This is your housing. Let me widen my picture. That's the housing that holds the caliper on. Here's my brake caliper. And then there are only 2 bolts that hold your caliper onto the caliper housing. Bolt here and a bolt here. These are metric bolts, to let you know, for those who want to do this job. This assembly is pretty easy to come off. The difficult part in doing this job is getting the rotor off. I was not going to replace my rotor when I initially started this, but there was some evidence showing it really needed to replace. So I'm going to show you the rotor in just a moment. But I want to show you when a rotor becomes difficult to come off. There's really one of 2 things that are happening. Either it's rusted onto here, or somehow the parking brake has rusted onto the inside of the rotor. So this rotor is really a combination of 2 things. It's a drum brake and a rotor. Rotor being like a disc brake on the outside, but you got the drum part for your rear parking brakes. So that's your parking brake assembly, and this is usually what it looks like on an F150, or even on a GMC or a Chevy, or even a Dodge. So let me show you the rotor and why I took it off. When I took the rotor off initially, right here on this edge, there was a lip. So what happens is, as brake pads press against the surface of a rotor, it begins to wear the rotor out. And if it wears so much or too much, you'll actually have a lip here. Now what I do sometimes to prolong the rear rotor, or even a front rotor, is I will take a grinder, something like this, or something like this, and I will actually grind this lip down so it's flush. Because what happens is, when you put new brake pads on, they are the width of this contact area, and if you put new brake pads on, this rough side will break down the brake pad quicker than normal. It'll reduce the life of the brake pad. So one thing I do is grind this down. So I started to grind this down, but then I start feeling the back side of this, and this is why I decide to take this off and replace it. Let me flip this around. So as I was grinding the face of it, I was feeling the back side of this when I removed the brake pad or the caliper off. And I started grinding this down, and I started finding myself taking chunks of the rotor off as I was grinding it down. When that happens, that's bad deterioration. It was too much overall. You can see here, this one's pretty defined. And that's a pretty much telltale sign that this rotor needs to come off. Also, if you look from this angle, you can see there is a very defined lip right here. That's another thing, that the rotor itself is just worn out too much. You're always going to get surface rust on the outside. That's normal for our area that we live in here. And you can just take chunks of this off. No big deal. But that was something that told me it was time to get it off. Now, when a rotor becomes difficult to pull off on the rear end, the reason why is this. What happens is the parking brake is always against this very lightly. And if you forget to turn your parking brake on, that's how this thing gets cleaned up. But there's a lip here that develops because of rust and wear. So you got your wear here and your rust here. And this here is what gets hung up on trying to remove the rotor from the rear. On the front, this is why I removed the front. You can see the corrosion that's just taking place here. And here you can see this is just the only contact surface between the brake pad and the rotor. It should be from here all the way to here to the outside edge. So that's why I replaced the front rotors. I knew they were going and it needed to be done. And just chunks of rust. So doing this reverse, usually you'd show how to take off the rotor first and then why you took off the rotor, but since I already have it off, I thought I'd show you the rotor first. So I'm going to show you how I took off my rotor. Obviously there's several ways to take off a rotor depending on how stuck the rotor is. There are pulleys out there. You can use hammers out there. My rotor came off kind of easy because what I do is I grease the back side of the rotors before I reinstall them. And that way down the road, if I ever have to remove them, they should come off somewhat easy. But the rear does not come off that easy compared to the front. So stay tuned, and when the parts come in, I'll show you how to take off the front, off the rear rotor. So, time to remove this rear rotor. So just like the fronts, there's 4 bolts that we have to remove. So let me flip this around. For the caliper, you have this top bolt. You have this bottom bolt. These are the first 2 bolts that you remove. Next, to remove the caliper housing, there's 1 bolt. I guess from this angle. Get this bolt here. You can see how close it is in its proximity to the caliper bolt. And then one right there. Again, here's your caliper bolt, and this holds your caliper housing. So what you can do is put the camera here and show you how quickly this comes off. So now the removal of these caliper bolts here are metric 13. Any vehicle you work on, whether it's made in the US or Japan, whatever, it's going to be metric. So just keep that in mind. I'm using 13 for metric on this. comes our caliper. We'll just lay it right here on the suspension. Next, these two bolts, also metric, 18. I'm just using a breaker bar to loosen these up. And we're just going to use the ratchet to take them off. I know I have the pneumatic air gun, but I'm showing here that you can do this with normal tools if you don't have pneumatic tools. And off comes their housing. So next will be to yank this off. Now, if you can see, I'm getting movement here. So that means that this rotor is not frozen to the axle. So we're gonna just muscle it off. So what I'm gonna do is on this side, I have no shield here that's blocking the rotor, but I do on the opposite side over here. So the shield starts from the top, goes all the way around, ends here. So I'm gonna use this side here to hit it with a mallet, and on the right side, I'm just going to take a poker here and stick it inside and just pull on the right side and hit and pull at the same time with the left side. Here we go. So looking at this rotor, you can see there's a very thick edge as well as here. So it's beyond its life. Also, we can look at the end here. So this is done. So before I put the new rotor on, I'm gonna get some, take my air gun. I'm gonna blow out all this brake dust that's inside here. And then I'm going to squirt silicone grease in here to penetrate this so my parking brakes work properly. Then I'm going to take anti-seize and just squish it all over the place inside here. And then I'm going to take anti-seize and put it on the outside of here. Before I take the blowgun to all this, definitely put on a mask. The reason I'm putting the anti-seize on this part of the hub is so in the future, when I have to replace this rotor again, it will not rust to the hub. It doesn't mean it'll come off any easier, but what it does mean is it will not stick. Your parking brake will always fight you when it comes to taking the rotor off. The original rotors I ordered were delayed from the parts place, so I couldn't wait. After 2 weeks, I said heck with it. So these rotors here I bought from AutoZone. Make two kinds, one with a 3-year warranty and one with a 2-year warranty. This model I bought is a 2-year warranty. So I just took the plastic off. The rotor is pre-treated for areas that are highly susceptible to rust. As you saw, as the old one came off, it was loaded with rust. Because the area I live in, we use salt on our roads in the winter, as well as a pre-treatment. So put this rotor on, just push it, all done. Next is reinstalling your caliper housing. So I'm taking off the old brake pads. In the new brake pad kit, it comes with these new brackets. So take these off. And when you take them off, look at how they're put on to begin with, because they're very different from the front brackets. Next thing I'm going to take off is this. This is what your caliper is attached to. This should slide in and out quite easily. So I'm going to take this off and re-grease it. The grease I'm using is brake caliper grease. And it's fine to be generous putting this on. Take your slide bolt, turn it as you put it in, and then move it in and out to be sure the grease is getting spread. And then push the sliding bolt in so the boot pushes against the housing. Same for the other side. This one here will be stiffer because, and I'll show you why, there's a rubber grommet installed on this. This here's a rubber grommet. It doesn't allow this slide bolt to go in and out as easily, but that's by design. So don't worry if it's difficult to get out. It's because of that piece of rubber on there. And no, I would not take that rubber off. Again, spin, push it in and out. It's not going to slide as easily. Push it in until the boot goes over the lip. Remove the excess grease. In the brake kit, in the brake pad kit, it comes with the new hardware. The hardware is stainless steel, just like the old ones that I took off. So we're going to install those right back onto these while I have this off. And they clip on, so you gotta, what I do is I start from one end and work my way over. And then, if I can find it, I take a flathead screwdriver and just push it down. Son of a bitch. Nothing like driving a frickin' driver into your palm. Well, I know that one's bleeding because I can feel it. Didn't break the glove, but it definitely broke the skin. I'm going to put this on the ground and push down on it. So looking at the side, I can see I'm just about flush. Of course, the other one comes off. So I got the braces on. That's what your pads will attach to. So I'm just going to do a little anti-seize on the surface here. A little dab of anti-seize on my bolt, and we'll reinstall the caliper housing. I do the top bolt first. Just do it hand snug. Anti-seize again. And just doing a little dab. You don't need a lot. Now I'll do the bottom one. Now they're hand tight. Take your ratchet, tighten it back up. Then take your, I'm going to say pry bar, but it's not the word I want. But we're going to say it. Take the pry bar and just torque it tight. Caliper housing's on. Next, our brake. The caliper itself is very clean, but what I'm going to do is put anti-seize on this part of it before I put it back on. But we need to squeeze this, because if we don't, we won't be able to get this caliper back on with the pads in place. So next, let's squeeze this. To do that, you need a C-clamp and take the old brake pad. Put the old brake pad inside the caliper. I'm going to have to open up my C-clamp. And then you're going to tighten your C-clamp onto the caliper. So you can see what I'm doing here. So I'm going to tighten the C-clamp so it pushes this caliper back in. I meant to say I'm using a C-clamp to push the cylinder, the hydraulic cylinder, back into the housing of the caliper. So now you can see what it looks like. It's flush. The no, I just forgot it. The piston is pushed back into the housing. So now it's all set to reinstall. But we're not going to put it on because we got to put our brake pads on. Now compared to the front, the brake pads that go in the rear are definitely different. I got a notch. That notch, looking at the old bracket, that notch goes in like so. So when you put these on, be sure the curvature of the brake pad is the same curvature as your rotor. Now before I put it on, I'm just going to do a little dab of anti-seize again. on the bracket. Just a little dab, that's all I need. Then work this in. And you're gonna bend the top part around, but I will admit, the pads for the rear for any vehicle are not the easiest to put on. There we go. Before I put the caliper back on, I'm going to put anti-seize on here. And on the other one. I also put anti-seize on the caliper and the piston that comes out. See how that slides right over the brake pads? That's because we compressed it. Put your bolt in. I already have anti-seize on my bolts that hold my caliper. And there we go. New rotor, new brake pads, everything re-lubed, put back in, parking brake lubed up, and we're ready to put the tire back on, and that's it. So that's all that's involved in putting, swapping out rear brake rotors. Now there are videos out there showing you how to do it, and a lot of those videos are showing you when the thing is frozen to the hub. Obviously I don't have that problem, but if that happens to you, there's some very good videos out there showing how to remove it when it's frozen to the hub. Those are rotors that were left on way beyond their lifespan, and they should have been taken care of probably 4 or 5 years beforehand on those users. But there are tools that you can borrow or rent from your local auto parts place. They're called pullers. Some people are familiar with them in regards to pulling pulleys off of drive shafts, but they also make very large ones to pull off the rear rotors off a vehicle. Most of the time you won't need them for the front rotors, just because of the way the rotor's designed, but mostly for the rear rotors. So this is Big Guy DIY signing off. Have a great day, and any comments or any questions, place them down below and I'll do my best to get back to them and answer them for you. Give me a thumbs up and please subscribe. Take care.